It's very fortunate that I'm following County Clerk Shu and his analysis of kind of the problems that we're facing, because I think, I hope to maybe provide some possible solutions to the issues that we face, especially related to voting and civic engagement and what we can do on campus. And so the first thing I want to talk about was, how did COVID-19 impact our voting engagement plans and efforts? And so historically, like as Kate mentioned, I've been on campus for, since 2017, and primarily most of our voting engagement, the answering of questions, really has come from students. It's come from student organizations. There had never really been any kind of institutional approach to this kind of work, to this form of informing people. There weren't many coalitions other than the Dole Institute's Civic Engagement Advisory Board, and that still was primarily made up of student organizations. And so really what we did in 2020 was started relying a lot on the institution of KU, and we started looking to, there were so many people, if it be from, the Jayhawk athlete movement to the Center for Service Learning to many different departments on campus, that all decided to pitch in whatever way they could to try and help educate people around the voting process. And as, County Clerk Shu mentioned, if we're unable to change those barriers, like you're not unable to change the deadline to your voter registration or ID requirements or what have you, the most important thing is that we inform people that those barriers exist so that they can overcome that hurdle, so that way they can exercise their right to vote. And speaking as someone with experience on campus, people do not know as much as you think they do. And they often have questions that are really stemming from the fact that they're from different states, and the uncertainty of if they're even able to vote in Kansas, because many of them think that they should be voting in their home state elections, and they're like, oh, well, since I'm not there, I don't know enough, and then they just end up not doing anything about it. And another aspect that I think is important to consider when talking about the importance of voting, especially in higher education, is that this is a habit-forming behavior that we can help instill in these folks, in these students, that can be lifelong. And it's important to consider the impact of that from a societal perspective of, like, we're sending students from KU to go out into the world where they will be citizens. And so it's a matter of how well we inform them, how well we inspire them to civic engagement, that they take that wherever they go and they improve their communities there. So I kind of have some brief categories I wanted to go over that I think are really important when talking about institutionalizing civic engagement on campus, meaning that we're kind of approaching it all fronts. First is reflect on past elections and foster year-round political learning and participation, removing barriers to student voting, develop informed voters, talk politics across campus, and involve faculty, staff, programming, and curriculum. And I have a lot of points on some of these, and I'm not going to go over all of them because I don't have time, but I really want to get across the idea of how creative we can be when thinking of how to educate students, how to engage in civic engagement, and how to promote it. There's so many ways we can do it, and I think it really is up to us, and it's a responsibility for all of us. But looking at this slide, we can see that, for me, the pie chart on the pie chart on the left side shows really where we focus currently in regards to, like, when we're educating students about political learning, and it's during the election season. That's when it's very highly present in people's minds because it's in the media, it's across everywhere. And I hear it all the time. People have already been mentioning, we're like, oh, thank gosh this year is not election year. And I'm like, hey, it is an election year. It's a local election year. It's still important. And it's also, we still have all these current events that are still going on in, like, the Kansas legislature and all these different government bodies. And it's important that we're also highlighting those opportunities as well, because I think this ties in with County Clerk Shu's point about people not trusting the system and saying that their voice doesn't matter, in the sense that when we only focus on voting in that election process as their only opportunity to engage in the system, I think that that can kind of come across as inauthentic because they're like, well, it's just one vote. Whereas if we view it as like a 365 days out of the year kind of process, we can see that people can become more invested in the system in a sense of invested in changing it and are more aware of as well. So they're just more civically engaged and better citizens in that regard. And then on the right, I just have some turnout percentages that I think are really telling of how there's just this groundswell of energy around voting participation, especially at KU. And this has gone really primarily unfacilitated by the administration. This has really just been natural paying attention as well as just the media driven and just what's happening in our country if that's creating that kind of turnout. And I'd love to know what the turnout is for the 2020 elections as well. So that'll be interesting as soon as that data is available. And yeah, I'm not going to go over all these, but I again wanted to list off barriers to student voting. And these are some ideas that we pursued as well as ideas that maybe didn't happen, but most of these are ones that we actually followed through on. But the main thing is that this is a responsibility of all of us, because I think as an institution of higher education, when there is an information barrier, when people at our university don't have the information they need to practice their right to vote and their citizenship, and they're at an institution of education where they should be informed about that, to me, that seems highly ironic. And I think that that kind of requires of all of us to look to where there are issues, and especially within regards to voter registration, mail-in ballots. There are several issues in regards to the questions that people get brought up, because every question that goes unanswered is another reason why someone could not vote or someone could not participate in the process. And, these were just some of the ideas that we had. And there really are tons of more of other ways we could increase accessibility. The third point was to develop informed voters around civic education. I think this is the more part where I think the Center for Service Learning, as well as the curriculum aspect, gets involved in around like incorporating something that we're working on at the Center for Service Learning. Is, if you look at that third bullet point, is developing a KU voter guide to propose to the KU 2021 student orientation. So that's actually something that we hope there we can actually give to each student that comes to KU, is like, hey, here's your voter guide. This is a brief overview of all the rules, resources that you can go to. That way that they're immediately given that, and it's kind of asserted that this is, an expectation of you, that you kind of are aware of this and that you know what to do. And, I also think that it's just very important to have candidate forums that we organized that help make sure that students are aware of the candidates, the issues that are present. And something that I think is really important, especially looking into this local election, is making sure that that's still happening in your classroom. The more that you can incorporate, political issues or current events that are going on, I think that's super important. And I think that that can help us increase turnout. And because I would love to have early voting on campus for local elections, but we don't have enough need for it yet. So we need to get people to turn out in those elections, so that way we can get that a greater accessibility there. And then my fourth point, and I know I'm running close to time, so I'll hurry up, and is to involve faculty and staff. And so something that we didn't get to actually share or used widely because it was kind of developed later, but one example of this was we worked on a syllabus edition that provided voting information, and that included deadlines and other content, as well as something that I think everyone in here, if you're involved in the KU community, would be joining the Civic Ambassador Program organized by the Center for Service Learning. I think that that network of groups across KU, that collaboration is going to be instrumental in increasing our civic engagement and really creating a culture around voting and political participation at KU. And then I always think that curriculum centered around community engagement and service learning, current political issues are super important, especially from the point of helping people wrap their head around issues, dispelling misinformation. I think that those can be really influential experiences in a student's life that could then impact them and inspire them to pursue those kinds of efforts throughout the rest of their coursework and their life. And then the last thing I had to say is just talk about politics and engagement. And I think this one is probably the hardest for people in academia that I've found, because I'm not scared of doing it, but it's seemingly a lot of people in higher education are scared of bringing up politics, especially at KU. There's a very, and that's rightfully so, because it should remain nonpartisan when coming from that perspective. But, I think that we have to really shake off our fear of that and ensure that we are making the discourse really active on campus. That way students get interested in it, they get educated, and there's really no excuse for that from the barrier side.